Welcome. Can everybody hear me? All right. So a little bit of late start, but that's okay. A lot of the cavalry is improvising as we go. Raise your hand if you were here for the cavalry launch 5 years ago. All right, cool. Raise your hand if this is your first time and you don't know what the heck I Am The Cavalry is. Even better. All right. All right. So we're going to use this first block as a little bit of a reflection on the first 5 years. It's amazing to me that there have been 5 years. Very few hacker initiatives escape their initial launch and achieve escape velocity. But more importantly, I think what we really want to do is figure out what the next 5 years have to look like. So it's a little bit of visuals to assist here. It's mostly also to frame the track for the next 2 days. We are supremely grateful to BSides for giving us a home for our launch, for giving us a home every year, for giving us a bigger home every year. Because we are trying to make the world a better place, and it's not easy to do. It's so much easier with support from such a family as BSides has been. So before I jump into a bunch of stuff, I'm Josh Corman. I'm one of the founders of IamTheCavalry.org here 5 years ago. Actually, on August 1st is our technical birthday. Beau?
I'm Beau.
I think some of you know the story, but Beau did not even see the launch and the call to arms. He was giving a talk about how to be a digital vagabond, avoid U.S. taxes, and have fun. Something like that. Is that close?
Yeah.
Okay, pretty close. And we met over some booze in the speaker lounge, and he said, after exchanging what talks were about, he's like, I'm in. And I think it's undeniable Beau has been the most valuable player and the most ardent contributor and the most patient and the most flexible. And so grateful to have, that means our friendship is 5 years old now too. Didn't even know each other. So Beau has tirelessly put together this track. I'm going to try to give a little bit of framing of the origin and what we've been doing. There is press in the room. We are recording this. I tend to keep a lot of cards close to the vest. I'm going to be a little more open this year out of necessity. It's been 5 years. But mostly what I want to challenge, and this is maybe something I was going to say later, so I'll keep it to myself. But one thing we're going to do is pass around, unless you're not 21. One of our cavalry teammates found cavalry bourbon whiskey. All right. If you just mentally delete the line that says last stand and you read the back, it is stunningly consistent with our zeitgeist and what we attempted here, especially with the bottom line of now is the time or never. So we have some number of little plastic shot glasses, and we have a bottle of this. So I'd like to thank the people who made this possible. But we're going to pass this around, whoever wants to get started. If you're not 21, do not touch it. All right. All right, so I don't want to slide us to death, and it's going to be more of a guideline than a script here. But basically, since some people don't know, you're like born to do this, right? Yeah. All right. All right. The initial launch had a little bit of a different flavor than anything, but let me just quickly jump to kind of our core zeitgeist here. When we launched, and I'm going to show the actual one of the launch slides, we said, look, we're deeply concerned about the relationship between technology and the human condition. The line I used was, our dependence on connected technology is growing faster than our ability to secure it. And I got really worried about that. And I was worried across a couple of dimensions, body, mind, and soul. Body was public safety, human life. Mind was the ability to do research without criminalization. And soul was the relationship between technology and civil liberties, or how people treat each other. And one of Beau's biggest contributions was really convincing me that we really had to major in one of those. We really had to major on public safety, human life. And that really was one of the things that first captured my attention. But what I think we've really done, if you abstract, is when we said the cavalry isn't coming was the name of the talk, we didn't even have a name for the group. We basically just said, if you think someone's going to come fix this for you, they're not, right? Who do you think's going to fix it? We kept looking for the adults in the room and couldn't find any. So part of the name was, if the cavalry isn't coming, if no one's going to save you, then it falls to you, right? You get to be the thing that's missing. So what we said is, answer the call and personally declare, I am the cavalry. I'm going to be part of that solution. And the idea was to be a helping hand, not a pointing finger. It was to be an ambassador, a translator, a teammate, to reach out of the echo chamber into public policymakers, the public and public safety industries like cars, medical devices, et cetera. And we had a lot of really good research from folks like Jay Radcliffe and others that were like looking into this stuff. They just weren't getting heard. There was no bridge. There was no trust between the hacker community knowledge base and the general public we wish to serve. We didn't really know it at the time, but we were really creating a safe space for a subset of the hacker community. I like to talk about the 5 Ps of good guy motivations, right? There's protectors that want to make the world a safer place. There's puzzlers that do it for challenging curiosity. There's prestige that do it for glory and ego, to be the first to do something, the best at something, the one on the news. There's some sort of profit or professional development. We can make a living off this, or personal gain. And there's some sort of politics, protest, or patriotism, some sort of ideology. And, you know, hackers are complicated. No one of us is like only one of these things. I tend to be a protector first and a puzzler second. So I want to do things that matter, but I also want to do really hard things. We kind of created a safe space in the cavalry for the tribe that wants to protect. And by accident, we also attracted the tribe that wants to do puzzling, right? That still has that curiosity and that thing, the ability to take things apart and put it back together. But really kind of what we tried to do, whether we meant to or not, was kind of build the superhero class. It doesn't mean we're arrogant. It doesn't mean we think we have all the skills. It just meant that we really felt like the world was heading in a bad direction and maybe we could do something about that. I've met Stanley a few times. The last time I met him was just after his wife died. So a tiny, maybe meandering anecdote. But they all said basically, do not ask him about his wife. Do not say you're so sorry. He'll just start crying. He'll leave the room. This is his last Comic-Con tour. And everyone's like, well, what do we say instead? And he said, well, say some way he's touched your life, right? So there's this long line of people to sign stuff. And I'm trying to think, what do you say to Stanley on probably his last tour when he's really hurting? And I don't even remember the exact words I said, but what I basically realized is I wanted to say that anything that I do in my life that is even remotely heroic, that he gets part credit for that. And, you know, we're not going to get a conversation about starting I Am The Cavalry or changing public safety policy or having the FDA do the first recall in history because they understood how important this was to preserve the trust of the public. I wasn't going to get into any of those anecdotes with him. But basically what I realized is, if you've ever met like a first responder or a soldier or a firefighter or ER tech, there's just something about them where they live a heroic life. And for most people, you know, you just go about your life doing your stuff and you don't really think about the impact of your actions on others. And one of the things we were trying to tap into with this movement was, you know, if you can taste a moment of heroism, it's a pretty good life, right? If you can have a vocation or a profession where you're heroic every single day, that's freaking amazing. But the thing I loved about Stan Lee wasn't either of those. He was another order above that, which is that he inspires heroism. And I think what I've been most impressed with all the teammates we've gathered through the years here is that we took people who had power, who had good to give, who had some talent or some way to contribute, and we inspired that heroic gene. And that's been inspiring in turn to us, right? Because every time we get beat up or sad or frustrated or whatnot, we look at something one of you in this room did. So I'm going to do a little bit of the unauthorized biography here. A few of you know the real story. I'm going to give a sanitized version of the story, especially, like I said, it's recorded and whatnot. Does anybody remember when Jericho and I researched Anonymous and the rise of hacktivism? Okay, so that was some pretty risky stuff, but we felt it was important. We saw large groups of post-national youths opting out of social contracts, rebelling, taking direct action online, using primitive hacking skills, maybe just DDoS, maybe just a little bit of, you know, Metasploit here and there. But I was really worried that that was the first wave of something more worrisome. So we started researching, we started writing. Governments took notice, the international community took notice, the UN took notice. So we started getting asked to do briefings. It's like, how do you get hackers to go into intelligence community briefings? But we found is, wait a second, why are you asking us? Shouldn't you be telling us what's going on with this stuff? But they didn't know. And I started realizing the real power and the real knowledge was really in the talent pool that comes to DEF CON every year. And that was kind of scary. So anyhow, through all that work, Jericho and I wrote one last little leg or epitaph to that piece of research. It was like 2.5 years of research on what cyber war would probably look like. Not kitten killing, oh my God, fear factor FUD stuff, but like, what would electronic warfare really look like? And that became something that got very popular in the intelligence community. So there was a not classified but sensitive briefing where I got to pick 5 of my favorite cybersecurity minds. I said cyber. I'm going to say it a lot, but don't worry, you're drinking bourbon. And we got to bring them into Fort Meade for 2 days to do a direct meeting with General Alexander at the time on how do we voice our concerns for public safety, human life, national security level issues to arguably one of the most powerful people in the world. Now, not everybody trusted that we weren't going to be put in jail or whatever heading into Fort Meade, but we assembled, some pretty interesting people. But one of the more interesting parts was think how amazing someone like an H.D. Moore is, or how amazing someone like Dan Kaminsky is on their own. But what was even more powerful is how strong they were together, the ideas bouncing off each other, the interaction with fairly important folks. And in the course of doing that discussion over 2 days, there's really 2 forks to the story, but the short version is by the time we were done answering challenge questions, and here's just an example of one of the challenge questions, General Alexander said, if you could add 1 sentence of legislation that would have the most material impact on public safety, human life, and national security, what would that 1 sentence be? It's a pretty awesome question. In fact, I always like to hear what your answer would have been. Without going into tons of detail, my answer at the end of 2 days, because I was thinking like a hacker and domino effect, was anything sold to the federal government must be patchable. You're going to see that come up elsewhere sometimes. But at the end of the 2 days, after every question we answered for all these challenges, essentially what he said is, I can't do this one, can't do that one. There's no authority for that. There's no political will for that. Until someone dies, this won't happen. And we just went down the list of brilliant ideas. Ideas that only a combination of hackers and his team could have come up with. Couldn't do any of them. And at the bar that night, we were licking our wounds, and I said to them half of the answer. Uh-oh. Is it time to do a shot?
You did say cyber.
I did say cyber. All right. So let's take a moment here. Raise your glass, if you got one. To 5 years of making the world a safer place together. That's my first taste. I was going to wait until I liked it before I asked him if I could have a lifetime supply. Okay. But what I said at the bar that night is, said, guys, the cavalry isn't coming. No one's going to fix this for us. And it was a dark evening. It was a sad evening. Doesn't mean we gave up, but it just kind of let half of the equation sit there for a while. And the other part, I think I can do quickly, but it gets personal. In between day 1 and day 2 of this 2 days at the fort, I came back to my cell phone in the car. You can't bring anything in. I find out I had 18 messages telling me my mom was going to die. So it kind of messed me up. I didn't want to reveal that to my friends. Just wanted to focus on the mission. But we hospiced her for a couple months after that, through her funeral. The last time I took her to church was the Sandy Hook shooting weekend. Bad timing. So her preacher over and over and over just kept saying, why is there evil in the world? Why is there evil in the world? And it really made me furious. I couldn't put my finger on why. I just was angry. So then when we went back to the same exact church for her funeral, being in the same room again and not wanting to be angry at my mom's funeral, I started just trying to channel it into something positive, something. And what I remembered is that she was my science teacher in 7th grade. Somebody got hurt or sick, so she got to fill in. And I learned 3 things from her. The 2 things that I applied to this funeral. Basically said, look, last time we were here, we were talking about Sandy Hook. As a father, I was mortified. As a citizen, I was mortified. As someone loses his mom, I was mortified. But we kept asking, why is there evil in the world? It didn't sit right with me. So I think I finally put my finger on why. And what I said is, of many things she taught me as a science teacher, one is that darkness isn't a thing. It's an absence of light. And cold isn't a thing. It's an absence of heat. So maybe it's not just the presence of evil, but the absence of good. And if you see something missing in the world, maybe it's our job to put it there. So then I asked my whole extended family, I said, what's the absence of Marie? It's my mom. And no one knew how to answer, obviously. But I said, you know what? We don't get to find out. because now it falls to us to do what she was doing. And in that moment, I finished the other half of the question, right? So if the cavalry isn't coming, we got to do it. So I don't know who you're waiting for, and that was the call. So I licked my wounds, healed up a little bit, came to the desert for B-Sides, for DEF CON. We didn't know if it would work at all. We didn't know if we'd get laughed at from being cynical. We didn't even have a talking slot. Banshee and Jack made it happen. So in a room full of very wounded, very frustrated post-Snowden anger and anxiety, with a lot of people thinking, I'm going to take my skills to the dark side, we wanted to create an opportunity to be light, to be heat, to be good. And that was that trinity, right? If something's missing, let's put it there. And many of you answered the call. We didn't know if it was going to work at all. The idea was, if the cavalry isn't coming, maybe we should try something, anything. Talked about fuzzing the chain of influence. We talked about focused on body, mind, and soul. Public safety, human life, which would appeal to the mass market, to our neighbors, to policymakers. Instead of saying, hey, hacking is First Amendment free speech and sounding like a bunch of whiny brats, maybe we said if we can demonstrate a vital, necessary, missing public service and public good that we are both uniquely willing and able to do, maybe they'll protect that ability to do research. And I was originally going to bite off more than I could chew, but Beau convinced me not to. But we were also really concerned that technology was changing the way we treat each other. And I think it's undeniable it is. I even have an unpublished essay on how social media is destroying society, which I almost finally 7 years later decided to publish during the Facebook hearings. But so these were the things that we said, look, instead of waiting for someone to go fix them, what can each of you do? It was never meant to be a spectator sport. It was meant to be a personal declaration. Now, folks like Jay, you were already on the way. You were researching the devices. You were just having a hard time. So it wasn't just trying to fill the void. It was also being smarter, because hackers tend to be solo actors. We tend to, go at this on our own. We don't like teamwork. We're not good at teamwork. We think you have to have permission to do stuff. You have to come up the right way, do the right things in the right order. We're not good at teamwork. So the other thing is, it wasn't important what we were going to work on. It was also important how we conducted ourselves. And one of the things we said is, look, we're terrible at empathy. We suck at empathy. So instead of us being that pointing finger, we're going to be a helping hand. And instead of saying all the things they did wrong in the past, we're going to make sure they do things right in the future. So we want to take all the good work Jay had done, but front end it with how can we get better devices into his hands? Or when he's broken it, how do we find a way to fix it? Or when we have all that packaged up, how do we talk to the FDA in a non-threatening way? How do we build that trust? And instead of hacking a single flaw in a single device and getting one recall, we wanted to hack the system to save all devices, right? So we just said, let's do what we do best and start thinking like hacker, identify the chain of influence, map it, fuzz it, try things, fail fast, iterate. Didn't know if it would work at all. But I think anybody who's been tracking us without giving a laundry list of our accomplishments, and we have been very bad at sharing our accomplishments. We've been keeping a lot of them very, very quiet. For good reasons. We have saved lives. We have gotten in front of these things, not theoretically. We've actually had pronounced impact. And if you don't get a chance, if you aren't planning to get a chance, please do go look at this this new interface that we've set up with the policy folks with the Hewlett Foundation. You can directly interface. You're going to hear from some of them that are in this room that see the cavalry as their primary teammate in doing policy work in the executive branch and legislative branch. So with that, I'm going to shift quickly. So ultimately, we were told.
Quickly before you start that, how long do we have here? We're going until 12:30, right? Yeah, that's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to kick off. Yeah, we switched two together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm probably going to skip one thing, but we kept being told no one's going to do anything until somebody dies first, right? And that may have been true. We took that as a given. Possibly, I don't know if she's in the room yet. Oh, there she is. Possibly one of our proudest moments. Without giving a timeline, we first focused on the first year mostly on automobiles. There's only like 20 car companies, so we figured if we can get some muscles built on how to reform just 20 car companies, then we could pivot to something harder like medical devices and Food and Drug Administration. We were told that FDA is really hard to work with. Didn't prove to be true, but we were told they were really hard to work with. But one of the things we were told is, until there's bodies, no one's going to listen. But our goal right from day one was, if you wait for that, you've already failed. Because if there's a crisis of confidence in the public to trust these connected technologies, we're going to hurt more lives, right? In general, these technologies and breakthroughs are much better, much safer, much more effective at care than their alternatives. We don't want to just blindly trust them. We want to make sure that the trust we place upon them is merited. So at a minimum, we were trying to build those trust relationships and inroads such that when something really bad happened, we could have a prompt and as a response. So tongue in cheek, this is a joke for people on camera. I kind of got impatient after a couple of years and said, you know what? I'm going to do what every good self-respecting hacker would do. If people have to die first, let's just kill some people. So ultimately, we did kill 3 people in Arizona last summer, last May or June, in a hacking simulation with full partnership with the FDA and DHS and HHS and all different sorts of things. But I'm going to give a fictional story of the first confirmed fatality and tell me if this is science fiction or if this is just fiction. I usually play a song first, but I'm not going to do that. There's a Bob Dylan song I like called Who Killed Davey Moore? Anybody know it? Okay, nobody. Go listen to this song. Basically, he's a huge boxing fan. There was a boxer named Davey Moore who dies after a boxing match. And the question became, who killed him? Was it the other boxer? Was it, the fight promoters that hyped it up? Was it his fault for getting in the ring when he was sick to begin with? Was it the crowd cheering them on and egging them on? Was it the referee who should have called the fight? It just kind of walks you through who's to blame for killing this boxer, right? And it's a tough song. So I'm going to talk about who killed Davey Moore with Cyber Edition. So I got permission from him. Don't get mad. Don't be tweeting Vis that I did this. It all started with Vis. Everybody know Vis online? What he likes to tweet, what he likes to get upset about. He wanted to show us something on Shodan, right? Bored one day, pokes around on Shodan, finds something really dangerous. He wanted to show us how to get busy. Notices a ton of BusyBox instances, wildly vulnerable BusyBox instances on Shodan. And then the janitor, don't know if you guys remember the janitor, wrote the Bricker bot. The janitor decides, you know what, I'm going to come out of retirement because that's a really embarrassingly bad vulnerability. I could just brick all those devices, right? Why not? I did it before for Mirai. I can do it again. But the problem is, do you know who else uses BusyBox? Way more medical devices than you're comfortable with. So rest in peace, Davey Moore. And we now have our first confirmed kill of bedside infusion pump running BusyBox naked on the internet, exposed because of poor network security in most hospitals. So the question becomes, who killed him? Whose fault is it? And in a longer session here, maybe we could talk about this. One easier question is, who's likely to get blamed? Is it going to be Vis? It's going to be janitor? It's going to be the creators of Shodan? It's going to be the hospital who should have filtered that at the gateway? Is it going to be the device manufacturer for using such a crappy old thing? Is it going to be the FDA for not having been tighter on BusyBox earlier on? Is it going to be the people who actively resisted common sense legislation because, hackers hate legislation, so let's fight it all? Is it going to be the Chamber of Commerce who hates any attempt to make cyber better? Is it going to be the companies who fund it? Like, who's to blame when we have our first fatality? And what's the fallout and the consequences when we had our first fatality? And you could talk about this being FUD, but I think the real fear and certainty denial comes when we've been too cavalier for too long. And that's why we knew we couldn't be. And that's why we had to simulate these types of events in the Cybermen Summit. We had met 2 hacker/med students, now physicians, at their first anniversary in DEF CON, Christian DeMeff and Jeff Tully. And we couldn't believe that these 2 young guys were in med school and hackers. It was completely awesome. So we said, we know we got to do something. And I think we talked about this and showed a little video last year from some of those hacking simulations. So we did 3 different hacking sims in an ER with unwitting physicians to see, could they tell they were hacked? Did it affect patient care? Did they ask for an autopsy after? And instead of just hacking something and saying, "Ooh, it'd be terrible if you got a pacemaker hacked," one of the first tough love sessions I had with Christian was, he's like, "You know what would happen to 95% of people who have a pacemaker hack? They'd get tired. You guys need to improve your aim if you want anyone to listen." I said, "Well, does that mean we should just pack up and go home because is everyone safe?" He goes, "Oh, no, you could do some real serious damage if you hack medical devices. You just got to know how the actual hacking interfaces with human physiology, and we can help." So that's what we did. We took 3 demonstrable hacks of 3 different medical devices that aren't science fiction, and we put them in to see how it would affect physiology. And the results were terrifying. And we can show those videos. But more importantly, without giving the greatest hits, Beau and I worked, the Cavalry is a very large group. I think we have a couple hundred in Slack alone, which is the only measurable one. But we got a lot of supporters elsewhere, and we won't even put Govies or anyone who's FOIA-able into our Slack servers. So we're guessing we have around 500 folks actively participating. But a couple folks went real hard into public policy land. Beau and I even left the private sector for a bit to go in a nonprofit think tank and push even harder on what we call cyber safety. We tried to put cyber safety into the foray. We've had a couple dozen major breakthroughs. Probably most profound was our work with the Food and Drug Administration. But we put out things like on our first year anniversary, we said all systems fail. Cars are now computers on wheels. Maybe you got to be this tall to ride the Internet of Cars, right? Instead of making an ISO standard with way too much stuff, we just said all systems fail. Here's 5 ways to avoid failure. And we published this in an open letter to the car makers, and it started our deeper collaboration with the broader community and the Society of Automotive Engineers and Department of Transportation and Congress and whatnot. A bit later, and possibly with more fertile soil, we published, Beau took those great principles and translated it into very medical language with our Hippocratic Oath for connected medical devices. We don't have to tell this demographic to care about public safety, human life. They already do, right? The answer was translating it into familiar language. That is, these medical devices increasingly play a role in the delivery of patient healthcare. Maybe the devices, too, should support that intent. We did things to workshop with people to say, don't just blindly take the NIST cybersecurity framework. We keep saying IoT is no different. IoT is way different. And maybe it's not different if you really want to get pedantic, but we made frameworks like 6 dimensions of difference for how safety critical IoT doesn't conform to normal best practices, right? Things like different adversaries with different motives, things like different consequences of failure, like an availability attack on a web server, availability attack on a life-saving device, death, right? Availability attack on a pressure sensor on an oil and gas pipeline, explosion. Different context and environment, different composition of hardware, firmware, software, different economics, and massively different timescales. So we make these little frameworks as a honest broker. We bring them to Congress, we bring them to executive branch, we bring them to regulators, we bring them to Europe. And we try to initiate conversations that, cybersecurity in healthcare is not HIPAA. That's your privacy of your records. We care about your life. We make jokes like, I care about my privacy, I want to be alive to enjoy it. Or that we incentivize a corpse with their privacy intact over preserving patient care and life. And nobody can disagree with those things, right? And then we noticed that even though we're demonstrating all these great things, it took the Mirai botnet taking out the internet for a day to really get some public policy attention. And that's when Brickerbot and the janitors started doing their stuff. But that trust we started to slowly build with folks like the Food and Drug Administration. When Congress finally asked for, let's take a really serious look at healthcare cybersecurity, myself and I Am The Cavalry were asked to officially play a role in a congressional task force. And we got to have hacker eye view and ground truth put into the zeitgeist. We got to point out how dangerously underprepared we are in modern hospital environments. And I'm not going to go through this one, but the idea that hackers have not only a voice, but are sought after for their counsel and for their knowledge to be an active participant in some of this stuff is just really night and day from 5 years ago. We'd have tried bumper stickers, which we might groan at or even make fun of in the past. It's not an actual bumper sticker, but we try to synthesize down, like, how do you change the zeitgeist a little bit that don't just connect everything to everything else? I might want to drive a tractor trailer truck, but I'm not qualified to do so. So maybe we shouldn't just blindly assume every hospital with 0 security staff is qualified to run a connected operation. And back to the Stan Lee stuff, they like this one a little better, a little less threatening. But also in scary moments, really hard moments, probably one of the hardest moments of our lives was the Mother's Day weekend when WannaCry hit, right? We've been talking about this stuff. We've been preparing for this stuff. I don't think Beau and I slept for like 5-6 days straight when WannaCry hit. Here we are hoping that our national security apparatus is prepared to deal with such an event, and they're calling us. And they're asking our friends, like, can you help us figure out what the heck's going on? Or how do we warn hospitals? And again, that's scary, but if that's a role that we can play, this room helps play that. The stuff you guys do matters. The ability to mobilize a network of folks that know stuff we don't, to be able to answer questions we can't, to provide it to people who can and will act upon it. U.S. got very lucky in a lot of cases, but some of that luck was Irish luck, right? Hard work. The harder you work, the luckier you get. So a lot of this stuff was putting us in a position where we were close enough to be confused for people that knew what they were talking about and could help in moments like this. I already mentioned the Cybermen Summit. But it's also worth noting that while we don't want this to be, something, because we aren't the prestige group that wants to brag about the kind of things we do, we tend not to talk enough about the things we do. But, in a world that thought hacker equals criminal just 5 years ago, I want you to reflect for a moment that we've now had, I think 4 or 5 documentaries pointing out superhero hackers or good guy hackers or helpful hackers or hackers saving lives in hospital environments. I think there's been 2 on CNN, 1 on ABC Nightline. We're starting to turn the tide on this kind of thing.
But yeah, hopefully.
And even though it's controversial, which is part of my plea here for the next 5 years, we are actually, engaged in the scaffolding and architecture of public policy reform. There's a bill for IoT cybersecurity. There's a lot of fighting over it, but it basically says things like any IoT sold to the federal government must be patchable. That one sound familiar? It shouldn't have hard-coded credentials and fixed passwords. Every one of those vendors should have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure program inviting researchers acting in good faith to report issues to them without fear of legal reprisal. That's not Congress calling hackers criminals. That's not only recognizing the intrinsic value of this demographic, it's begging for it to be put into law that you can get safe harbor for doing these kind of things. And there's 2 other provisions, but these are really simple, common sense ways to make sure the next Mirai doesn't happen, or the next Mirai isn't comprised of medical devices. And one other thing that you should pay attention to is they used to call on witnesses as the CEO of McAfee or the CEO of Symantec or the CEO of FireEye. You know who they're calling on now? They're calling on your hacker friends. Not exclusively, but this is changing. In fact, I want to hone in specifically on Art Manion down there in the corner. This was the Spectre meltdown thing. And if you haven't watched it, go watch it. The Senate chairman of the committee and the ranking minority both, without flinching, are seamlessly and correctly articulating the value of coordinated vulnerability disclosure and chastising Intel and others for not using hackers better. Take a moment to reflect on how we felt 5 years ago, post-Snowden, with fear over criminalization research. I want to pivot real fast so that we can tee up the hard questions. So in general, what we've been trying to do, with your help, responding where needed on cars, on medical devices, on hospital preparedness, on oil and gas, on aviation, you're going to see later, on high-speed rail, on maritime, is we've become kind of the trusted ambassador to public policy domestically and internationally. This morning over breakfast talking to somebody, I don't know how I feel about this, but she basically described us as the Professional Association for Hackers. Now, we are not a professional organization, but we play the role of, if they want a trusted, independent voice of reason on cybersecurity issues, they come to us first. It might not even be one of our, identified teammates. It might just be that they know that we can point them in the right direction. And that feels pretty good. I feel like we've done quite a bit. I'm also here to tell you that we got to do so much more. I mean, I'm blown away by the kind of things we did over the last 5 years with your help. I'm terrified at how much more there is to do and how hard it's been to scale. Because what we did to get us here isn't going to get us to the next level. And I also fear at times, Jen Ellis is not in the room and she'd kill me for saying it, but I'm going to say it anyhow. I flirted with the idea of calling this talk, "The Cavalry is Canceled." Not because we haven't done a good job, but because we have, right? What we don't want to do is say, okay, the cavalry is on top of it. I support the cavalry. There are so many unsolved projects and so many missed opportunities where we could have commented on a public policy document, or we could have engaged in a workshop, or we could have started a new initiative. What we don't want to do is have this thing get passive. I think the question was, will this crazy experiment work? Does this blueprint actually have impact? The answer to that is hell yes. The question becomes, what do we do with that blueprint? Do we just kind of slog along and say the cavalry is working on stuff? Or do we create a vacuum where other people can fill it. And we don't want to arbitrarily pull the plug. Some people don't know when to stop. But I think the spirit of what I wrestled with the instinct of saying, okay, we had a 5-year run. It's great. We know the blueprint works. I'm so excited to see what each of you guys do with that blueprint. It's not to like stop what we're doing. In fact, we have to accelerate what we're doing. But really what the instinct was is how do we amp up the individual participation in this room? Beau is an inhuman superstar. There's only one Beau. And we're only going to go so far. And the question becomes, how do we get more logistical help, more delegation, more formal? You know, we've resisted public publicity on some of the things we've done. We've resisted taking money. We still have not taken a penny in 5 years. We've massively disrupted the way policy is done in the technology community. But to go further, maybe we have to actually look at some sort of formal structure. But I really want to start asking those uncomfortable questions of, instead of just slogging along for the next 5 years, can we be very deliberate about how we reinvent ourselves? Maybe Cavalry 1.0 is over. Maybe this 5-year run is done. Maybe we should have an explicit constitutional Congress like we did at DerbyCon, again, to decide what the next 5 years look like, so that we make a conscious choice how to organize, how to execute, how to engage differently for that road ahead. So I want to end a little bit of this just focusing on some of the things Beau and I talked about over scotch the other night. When we first launched, we said we were concerned about public safety, human life, of which there is still a ton of work to do. We talked about preservation of security research, which has made huge strides, but is not over. And we talked about soul, the relationship between technology and the human condition, which is a very, very different interest group than some of this stuff. But if you look at the tensions we're having, globalization with social media, with our inability to tame trolls or extreme groups, I think we've kind of adopted technology for its immediate and obvious benefits, but we've never done the cost-benefit analysis. And I think technology has shaped us instead of us shaping our use of it. And that's a different demographic than some of the people that might have been attracted to this room. But Beau and I have talked about at least two differences besides structural. One, maybe it's time that we start expanding and having parallel cavalry-esque templates or movements to more deliberately tackle some of these things that we initially orphaned, to have more focus and scope. And number two, orthogonal to that, maybe we start getting more overt about the things we do. We have benefited from our obscurity. We did not want to raise the attention of would-be adversaries. We wanted to get a lot of stuff done when no one was paying attention. But maybe we should start arguing and talking more. I asked him what his top 5 accomplishments were in the cavalry, and he asked me mine. And when we compared notes, we're like, I completely forgot we brought 2 sitting congressmen to DEF CON last year. Or I completely forgot we did the first clinical hacking simulations. And we're kind of forgetting about things that other groups may never accomplish. And it had served us for a time, but maybe we need to energize this group to be more excited because we haven't shared enough of the successes we've had. So we have a lot of trade-off questions to work through. But mostly, like, if we started to prove that, yes, this template works, and yes, you don't have to be defeatist and scream in the darkness, that bold, positive experimentation and open heart and leading with empathy can have results. We did that initially with a small group. We now have a large group. But I think we got to expand to what Brian Kiefer first said. We need a guild, right? So we've done some 5-man dungeon raids. We got to, if we want to take down the dragons, we got to find the next level of scale, the next level of participation. And I don't know how to get there, but I know that you guys can help us. So let's not cancel the cavalry, but let's ask ourselves, if this first 5 years proved the model worked, and I think it has, what should the next 5 years be? And what you're going to see in fantastic content throughout today and tomorrow is some of the ways we've engaged with media positively, some of the ways we've engaged with government stakeholders positively, some of the ways we have solved problems, some of the unsolved problems we have yet to look at. But please, whether it's you or someone within your sphere of control and influence, don't look at this as a track to watch. Look at this as a catalyst to start something. Drive your own project, and we will be that platform, that communication ambassador, translator platform that amplifies your passion. Because if you look at what we did with cyber safety, if you take the cyber safety out of it, what we've really built is a trusted network of hacking professionals that can interface with the outside world towards high effect in a very short time. So With that, I'm going to stop talking and show a very short video. Eventually. All right, hoping the audio works. This was filmed here last year during the track by Bob Dylan's son. Cybersecurity. All this software and connectivity that's defining modern culture is a pretty concerning thing. When you add software to something, you make it weaker. You make it hackable. And when you connect it to other things, you make it exposed. Vehicles, medical devices, hospitals, high-speed rail, aviation, power plants.
Our dependence on connected technology has grown faster than our ability to secure it, particularly in areas affecting national security, human life and public safety, global GDP and the economy.
These are not merely theoretical. We've actually now seen some types of cyber attacks that have had profound impact.
WannaCry and Petra and what we've recently seen with the ransomware, it compromised an entire ecosystem.
I had thought naively that if I can get as high and deep as I could to the decision makers in government, that they would just fix our problems. The cavalry isn't coming. Am The Cavalry is a completely grassroots volunteer organization. We brought together hackers and regulators and device makers, industry and government towards the outcome of meaningful policy reform or smarter engineering choices before you have high consequence failures.
If you just say you're a hacker, it resonates deep inside people as a negative. If you say you're an information security researcher, it's a bit different. Either way, you're doing the same work.
I think there are more hackers out there intending to do good and to help.
We share information a lot. We share techniques a lot.
Our focus is on things that are going to impact humans, right? Human life, public safety.
Our heaviest focus has been healthcare, followed by transportation, connected vehicles. But we have projects on maritime hacking. You can spoof GPS and divert ships into piracy shipping lanes. There's a high-speed rail or positive train control vulnerabilities in Amtrak's. We're also looking at tractors, which could affect the global food supply.
It involves both a reactive and proactive approach. The reactive approach is making sure your infrastructure is as secure as it can be. And then the proactive approach is actually doing threat hunting.
We had a lot of medical device hackers, and one's a diabetic, and he hacked his own insulin pump. He found he could give a lethal dose of insulin without authentication.
The manufacturer went public with the research to make sure that people were aware that there was security vulnerabilities in that device and how they could protect themselves against it.
This is not going to be two hackers in a basement trying to change the world. This is going to be a community effort.
Working with Josh Corman and with Beau Woods and I Am The Cavalry helps bring that type of cohesiveness to the ecosystem, which hadn't been there in the past.
It's not just a US thing anymore. There's people that live in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, who all say that they're members of the cavalry.
It holds the most promise working among those different stakeholder groups to be safer sooner together.
You know, I feel very conflicted about the last 5 years, but I am so inspired by every single one of you that has helped in any way, shape, or form. We had no idea if this was going to work, and we have so much more to do, but it works. We don't have to be angry all the time. The next stage is going to be figuring out how we wrestle with our own demons, how we hold our nose and get used to talking about cyber and talking to policymakers and don't look at all policies bad. Right? It's like fire good, fire bad. But we engage those teammates, and there's some incredible government allies in this room. And if it looks like, the spot the Fed used to be like the person to watch out for, I want you to spot the Fed here and thank them, because they are hackers too, and they have done breathtaking things. I can't even name the top 5 or 10 things that I'm proud of with this movement and the things we've done. But we're not just theoretically saving lives; we are actually doing so. And it's just so satisfying. So back to that Stan Lee thing. You guys are my heroes. Let's figure out how to be better heroes together and inspire more heroism. Thank you for those 5 years. I'm so excited by the next.